Oh, hello. Welcome to episode 88 of the Civil War Breakfast Club podcast. Oh, and thanks for listening. As always, I'm joined by Mary, a woman who celebrated Canada Day this weekend by dressing up in her Canadian tuxedo and bathing in a tub full of Tim Hortons coffee. I am merely a faded maple leaf named Darren. How are you, Mary?
Oh my God.
Or should I say, bonjour, Mary?
So you think you can speak both official languages now that you've been in my country for a weekend?
I crossed the border. I could speak the language immediately. So that's how good I am.
We'll see how you do when we go to Montreal sometime.
Oh, definitely. So what's going on? What's new with you?
Not much. We're back to recording after not recording for a few weeks. We took a little bit of a break there. But we're back tonight to not to steal your thunder. You're the host, but we are going to be talking the Tullahoma campaign.
Oh, that's exactly what we're doing. But since I am a fantastic host, I will ask you this question, of course, which is, what are you drinking tonight?
I am drinking Good Monster IPA by Collective Arts out of Hamilton, Ontario, and I'm drinking it out of my Joseph E. Johnson mug because he is going to get a little bit of a mention in our first part of the Tullahoma campaign, which we're recording tonight.
I've heard of him. Okay.
And what are you drinking?
Oh, thanks for asking, Mary. I am drinking, it's called Double Jitsu. It's from Bayfield? Baywoods?
No, Bellwoods.
Bellwoods. I was one of the three. Okay.
It's from Bellwoods in Toronto.
It's a beer in Canada, and I'm drinking out of my Mary Surratt mug because today is the day of the execution. Say what you will about that whole thing. I have a mug, and today I'm going to use it. So that's that. So we can get rolling with this. This is going to be the beginning of a two-parter we're going to talk about. Tullahoma. We're going to talk about the first part of it, and then next week we're going to go back to an action-packed episode and finish this thing up. So let's just kind of set the two just real time, okay? It's early July, and the eyes of Civil War's nations, the lonely eyes have turned to Vicksburg and Gettysburg, as they say, right? And we're going to talk about that red-headed stepchild, of course, which is this time of year, which is the Tullahoma campaign. Now, despite being completely overshadowed by the other events happening at the same time in July of 1863, this brilliant campaign by William Rosecrans against Braxton Bragg's army is right up there with U.S. Grant's Vicksburg campaign, is one of the all-time greatest in military history when you really think about it.
It is. And the Tullahoma campaign compared to something like Vicksburg, especially Vicksburg, but also Gettysburg, it only lasts about 11 days. There's really only one major battle in it, Battle of Hoover's Gap, which we're going to be talking about in this episode. But it goes back to what Rosecrans' plan was and how it factors into, driving Bragg away from where he is and eventually securing the city of Chattanooga, which ultimately, of course, this campaign they don't secure Chattanooga. But this is kind of making their way, they've got Stones River, which we're going to talk about in a few minutes about what happened there. They have to get Chattanooga. They're trying to drive Bragg out of like Middle Tennessee. But then after that, the ultimate goal is going to be Atlanta, which is going to be in 1864. But that's what this is. It's this brilliant campaign, not a lot of battles, not a lot of there's no Pickett's charge, anything like that. But it is up there with Vicksburg and Gettysburg.
It is. And what this campaign really did is it shined a bright light on Rosecrans and the Union. On the Confederate side, that this 10-11-day campaign really highlighted the deep distrust and hatred within the Confederate Army towards their commander, Braxton Bragg. And that has been simmering really since they evacuated the dance floor in Kentucky, right? And I just don't mean the rank and file soldiers. I mean the generals. Now, just after the Battle of Stones River in Murfreesboro, Tennessee in early January 1863, Bragg is going to pull his beaten army out of the area. And they're going to go about 30 miles south along the Duck River to kind of rest and relax and reform, right? Now, although his army needed rest, Bragg knew he still had to protect that city of Chattanooga you talked about, which was strategic. It was strategic due to a bunch of reasons. It had railroad junctions. It was a gateway to Georgia. There was a whole bunch of things. And he figured Rosecrans' army, even though he knew they were probably pretty battered too, he knew that they'd be coming eventually for Chattanooga. So he's going to have to prepare for it. Now, Rosecrans, like I mentioned, he did want Chattanooga, but he also knew he needed to rest his army of the Cumberland, which, like I said, was beaten up after Stones River as well.
Yeah.
So he's going to hang around Murfreesboro for about 6 months. He's going to be chilling there to give his men time to just recharge, their batteries. And Rosecrans insisted, and he has a quote, he says that he organized an adequate cavalry force to combat that of the enemy, which he considered vastly superior, the Confederate cavalry. He also wanted to establish, and secure a good depot of supplies before he moved out of Murfreesboro. So he wanted to be prepared. So, to that end, he's going to beg Washington for better cavalry
Yep.
resources. And of course, Washington says no. Now you got to remember too, their eyes are focused on Lee coming into Pennsylvania, as well as Grant primarily going to Vicksburg
Yep.
at this point, right? Although the Lee thing hadn't really happened yet, but Vicksburg probably was
No.
really taking up a lot of their time. And it's kind of like Pawn Stars. Lincoln goes, "Well, the best I can do is this." He says
Oh,
no, but he's going to
yes.
say, "I tell you what you can do. I'll give you the okay if you want to outfit an infantry brigade as a mounted unit, right?" And
Yeah.
so,
And the thing is this goes back to like February, and it shows there's a lot of miscommunication going on here too. Like February 17th, 1863, Lincoln writes to Rosecrans that he's concerned about the menace that is Confederate cavalry, which Rosecrans at this point is like, that's what I've been talking about the entire time. And Lincoln is like, you should do counter raids. And he Lincoln writes him, what think you of trying to get such a corps in your army? Could you do it without any or many additional troops, which we have not to give you, provided we furnish horses, suitable arms, and other appointments? Please consider this as an order, but please consider this not as an order, but as a suggestion. And then March 20th, 1863, Rosecrans writes to Halleck where his troops are positioned, and he ends off the correspondence with, we are pushing forward supplies to Nashville, but from the unfrequency of convoys and want of transports, we are somewhat delayed. Our want here is cavalry. So he's constantly going on about this, needing cavalry. And like you said, they basically say to him, you can go ahead and do what you want. And Halleck tells this to Rosecrans on March 21st, 1863. He says, no restriction is placed on your mounting infantry and cavalry arms and equipments are sent to you as fast as they can be procured. But it is believed that you weaken your force by mounting too many. Mounted infantry are neither good infantry nor good cavalry. That is when we have Wilder enter the dance
right.
floor. And he is basically like, hold my beer.
Well,
I
that
can
letter
do
that he
this.
from Halleck literally ended with, "and the horse you rode in on." That's the
It
funny thing
did.
about it, right? So,
Yeah.
so Rosecrans is in a situation where he's like, well, he's going to end up, Wilder, he's going to end up taking a brigade from Joseph Reynolds' division, okay,
Yep.
from that 14th Corps, and 1,500 men from the 17th and 72nd Indiana, as well as the 123rd and 98th Illinois, and place them in that mounted infantry brigade under that man you mentioned, Colonel, commanded by John T. Wilder. So he's
Mhm.
going to have an opportunity here, as they say, to want to take care of this. And the one downside is they have to find their own horses and get their own mules. So it's
Yep.
like, congratulations, you're in the NASCAR race tomorrow, but go find your own freaking
Get your
car.
own car. And the
That's
problem sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say, so that's the scenario. We're talking 1,500 guys. They just don't go down to the horse store or the mule store. I mean, you got to think about how that was. But the amazing thing about it, guess what they do? They do it.
Yeah, that's what Halleck basically says to him. Like he says, like Rosecrans has full authority to seize horses in the enemy territory, but he can't seize horses in the northern states. Halleck says the law regulates the purchase of horses, and every possibly authority has been given to the quartermaster of your army and of the Western Depot to purchase animals for you. But it's basically like, we can't give you that many. But if you want to like ransack them from the southern countryside, go ahead. So what had happened is Wilder discovered, around the time of Stones River, he's trying to go pursue John Hunt Morgan, who we just did an episode about.
I've heard of him.
And they're on mules.
It's
And
another Ohio lover.
he is big time. Not really. Anyway, they Wilder and his men are on mules during this when they're trying to pursue Morgan. And the problem with mules is they're not very quick. And so he requests to mount his entire brigade with horses. And Wilder ends up putting this idea of being a mounted infantry to a vote for his men. The 75th Indiana did not want to be mounted infantry, so they leave and they bring in the 123rd Illinois to take its place. So in Wilder's brigade, you have the 17th Indiana, the 72nd Indiana, the 98th Illinois, the 123rd Illinois, and the 18th Indiana Battery, which is commanded by Colonel Eli Lilly and also known as Lilly's Gunners. And these men gather horses from around the countryside and they have to take a few mules, even though they aren't considered the best. Now, the thing with John T. Wilder is he's well respected among his men. He was not a stretched, prim, polished commander, not a made commander, but a born one. And although his career with his brigade, he showed the gain tenacity, the elasticity, the supreme handiwork of unspoiled nature. He won the confidence of the entire brigade without an effort, and the men they could do whatever Wilder ordered, and his modesty equaled his merit. He never boasted. He was willing to be judged by his chips. He was active. He hated the monotony of camp life, and his brigade was early imbued with the same idea. So all these men have this same idea, and that's what we're going to see in this Tullahoma campaign with them is they just like go out there and they do it. And again, later it shows at the Battle of Chickamauga. So these men had originally been outfitted with Springfield and Enfield rifles. And then Wilder was like, yeah, we're not going to do that anymore. We're going to get them Spencer repeaters. And this allowed Wilder's men to lay down a tremendous amount of fire that could be delivered at a high rate of speed. And Wilder loved the Spencers. And the Spencers are a new thing at this time. They're a relatively new technology. So the Spencer magazine rifle was the most formidable weapon. And Wilder said, I believe them to be the best arm for the army use that I have seen. No line of men who came within 50 yards of another force armed with the Spencer repeating rifles can either get away alive or reach them with a charge. As in either case, they are certain to be destroyed by the terrible fire poured from their ranks by cool men thus armed. If the government would expand the large sums now used to induce men to enlist in arming the men now in the field with this kind of weapon, the rebellion would be, in my opinion, speedily crushed. And that's what Wilder had to say about it. But at the time, when Wilder suggested that he arm his men with Spencers, Washington was like, hell no, we're not doing that. So what does he do? He goes to the bank and he gets a loan and he outfits his entire brigade. And what he does to pay him back, the men just give him some of their pay each time they get paid. But eventually, Washington realizes how useful these weapons are, and they pay Wilder back for them. Now, the other challenge that Wilder faces with having mounted infantry is this is not something that's commonly done. So he has to develop his own tactics for it, but he still uses Hardee's tactics, but he develops them for mounted infantry. So they nearly always fight dismounted, single line with men at intervals of 6 feet, since they had the Spencers. And they always tried to get close to their opponents because then they would have the benefit of rapid fire. And they usually waited until they were within 300 yards to even fire. And they did not believe in long range fighting. Wilder said, my command had little time for drill as we were kept close to the enemy and our movements were mostly firing in range of our opponents. And that I found to be the most useful drill we could have. So these are the men. Wilder's men are going to be kind of like, and Wilder and his men are going to be kind of like the MVPs of the Tullahoma campaign with what they do. But this is where Rosecrans finally gets what he wants, is with this mounted infantry of John T. Wilder and what will become known as the Lightning Brigade.
All right. Well, Wilder, he gets those guns, very reminiscent of Nathan Bedford Forrest on the Confederate side. He uses his own money a lot in this case. He does get paid back. And so he's got that crack unit. Now, the other thing that Rosecrans, that he's sitting on his butt there, but the other thing that's holding him back is the weather. This is going to be a nonstop issue throughout this campaign. Is the weather's really bad, and the roads. It's not exactly the I-95 we're talking about here. We're talking country roads to the mountains. That's going to be muddy and crappy.
Yeah.
Now, so in the winter of early spring, moving this army, we're talking 60,000 or so people through Tennessee. Had to have been a miserable task, despite the fact that Washington, back at Washington, Abraham Lincoln, Edwin Stanton, and Henry Halleck, they're pulling their hairs out and wanting to know why the hell you're just sitting there staring at each other, and not moving towards Chattanooga. Now, the concerns from Washington were valid, though, right? Because though considering that U.S. Grant was in the middle of his assault in Vicksburg, and if Bragg knew that Rosecrans wasn't coming, what was the big fear? The big fear is he would take some of his army of Tennessee and shift them up towards Vicksburg to help out James Pemberton and Joseph Johnston over there, who were trying to hold on to Vicksburg. So they're sitting there going, okay, Rosecrans, here's the deal. The longer you're taking, the more they're going to move men. And then we got a whole new set of friggin' problems, right? Now, Lincoln about this is going to mention Rosecrans, and he's going to say to him, this quote from old Abe, the guy with the hat, Mary, I will not push you to any rashness. but I am very anxious that you do your utmost, short of rashness, to keep Bragg away from getting lost to keep Johnston against Grant. Two things to take away with that: Lincoln had a rash because he mentioned it twice. Okay, but he's afraid so much, not of Bragg, but of that army of Pemberton getting stronger to really, because Vicksburg, like he said, was the key he had to have in his pocket,
Yep.
right? Now Bragg, he had his own set of problems after Stone's River,
Oh
right?
my
No,
God. This is very
no.
dramatic. And I know you've got a lot of stuff on
Well,
this.
no, I mean not too much, but like Rosecrans, he needs to refurbish his Army of Tennessee. He's
Yep.
got about 40 or so thousand guys. So he rested behind a series of rocky hills centered around the town of Tullahoma, Tennessee. Okay. Now he extends his line about 50 miles from Shelbyville, Tennessee, in the west, up to McMinnville, which is in the east, but he's spread thin. Now the terrain is brutal. In his army, they had to defend three mountain gaps that Rosecrans would have to use to get through these mountains. One is the Belt Buckle Gap, one's the Liberty Gap, and one is Hoover's Gap. I got a feeling I'm going to be hearing about that one a little bit later on,
Hmm.
Mary. Just to guess. Um, the Rebs are going to build entrenchments to defend these narrow gaps, but they had limited guys. And the guys who were defending, they were mostly cavalry. Now, Rosecrans was kind of afraid of these guys, but there still wasn't too many. When these armies were basically in their places, Rosecrans and Army basically spent the next 6 months just preparing, okay? Because they knew they were
Hmm.
going to go. Now, that I mentioned before, the terrain, the area around Tullahoma was referred to by Irvin Buck. Now, he's Patrick Claiborne's aide, Mara.
Yep.
Now, you've heard of him. He called Tullahoma a godforsaken place, okay? Which is
Yes.
in the middle of nowhere. Now, the rain and snow turned those narrow roads into complete quagmires of mud. One of William Hardee's aides famously named the town the two Greek words Tulla meaning mud and Homa meaning mud.
Yep.
They talk about that. And you can imagine, you think about the Mud March. This is kind of what that was,
That's what I
right?
thought of when I was looking at this. And the other area they refer to it as the barrens because it's such poor farmland and it made it difficult for them to get food. Yet the ironic thing about this is they are protecting the railway for food to move from Chattanooga into to Lee's Army of Northern Virginia.
Mhm.
Yet Bragg's men are the ones that are starving.
Yeah, it goes to show how that is, But
Yeah.
and while the Rebs are sitting in this muddy wasteland, okay, they stewed and there was this nonstop, constant anger towards their commander Braxton Bragg. Okay, like if you're sitting around and you got nothing to do, and people are going to complain, they're always going to complain about the boss, but they got reason to. Many
Yeah.
found Bragg to be completely incompetent. He was cold. He was inflexible. He basically alienated himself from his core and the rest of it. He was just a miserable prick, is what he was. Now
Yeah.
he had some medical issues, but he was that guy. So he was the guy who would give out pennies on Halloween. That's who he was. Not a
Or
nice guy, Mary.
or
Not a nice guy.
raisins.
Or
Sorry to people who like
raisins.
raisins, but
Okay.
raisins are the worst. And this is something, this kind of, I don't want to call it it's not a mutiny, but it's nearly that at this time is like, it goes back to Perryville. This is
Hmm.
something that men like, William J. Hardee and Leonidas Polk are carrying with them. Now, mind you, Polk is a guy who's kind of his own problem too. Like, I mean, he takes orders it's like, oh, these are guidelines. They're not orders. I don't have to follow them because I'm Polk.
Well, many pushed for Bragg to be removed. They
Yep.
mostly did, okay?
Mhm.
But he had a good friend named Jefferson Davis who kind of remained supportive of him. Now, the animosity towards Bragg dominated the minds of the Army of Tennessee's commanders while they were sitting in the mud, knowing that Bragg had once again handed the initiative away in the region to the Federals again, right? He had a habit of getting there and then backing off, getting there
Mhm.
and backing off. January 27th, we're going to go a little bit ahead here. We're going to go backtrack here, and going back and forth. But January 27th, 1863, Joseph Johnston's going to visit and saw the state of Bragg's army. Now, many Rebs were thrilled to see him. Kind of funny how later on people thought about Joseph Johnston.
Yep.
He walked in like he was Santa Claus because you know why? Because they
They
thought
thought
he
he
was
was going to take
coming to
over.
take over, right? So here we go. We got ourselves a guy. Now Johnston's going to agree the morale of the army sucked, but he felt that Bragg kind of performed pretty well at Murfreesboro. And he wrote to Davis. He writes, "It would be very unfortunate to remove him at this juncture when he has just earned, if not won, the gratitude of our country." Okay, that's what he says, right? Okay, well, right.
Wow.
But with this newfound support, You know what Bragg's going to do? He's going to start walking around with his chest puffed out now. And he's going to submit his official battle report for Battle of Stones River. Okay, I know we're not talking Stones River, but I'm going to digress here. Okay, he used that battle report to criticize and take a warming beer piss all over his subordinates. Okay,
Oh, big
include
time.
because he used it to get against the guys who he hated.
Yeah.
He spoke well of William Hardee, though. Okay, he spoke well of Claiborne, Patrick Claiborne, and he spoke well of Leonidas Pope, of all people. He bashed Benjamin Cheatham for being drunk. He bashed John Breckinridge for being lazy and slow. I know this sounds like your performance report at the DQ last year, but we'll just I don't want to bring up bad
Okay.
memories, okay? But especially John McCown, okay, who he arrested for getting lost and exposing Claiborne's left flank during the battle. Needless to say, the officers he mentioned negatively were not exactly thrilled with this, right? Now, in response, Leonidas Polk is going to write his own battle report. He's going to write his own version, which contradicts a lot of what Bragg said. And he complimented Cheatham's performance, of all things, which led Bragg to think that Cheatham and Polk were in cahoots to get rid of him. So he's like, oh, he's contradicting me. He must want to get me.
Is this
So
when he writes the "Do you like me?" circle yes or no?
So he's going to do his own poll. But this is like Survivor. Who's going to be left? Who's going to be left standing in Tullahoma when this thing's all over? That's what this
Imagine
is.
Confederate Army Survivor.
Yeah, Braxton, you're off the island.
That would be amazing.
Grab your boiled ass and get on your mule and roll out of here. You're gone. Right? But at this point, Braggs does something that's kind of a head scratcher for whatever reason. He's going to write to Polk subordinates and ask them to what extent you sustain the general Polk and his his general disobedience. Basically, he's asking Polk's guys to throw Polk under the bus.
Yeah,
he wants him to basically dispute what Polk said. William Hardee, he's a peer of Polk as a corps commander. He got wind of this, and he advised Patrick Claiborne in the Great Sterling A.M. Wood, it must have been early in the morning, to ignore the simmering feud with Bragg that continued throughout the spring into the summer. Okay, so this is kind of the atmosphere, the personalities as we head into this campaign. Okay, the weather did warm in the spring, and the mood did lighten up a little bit. Okay. There's that great story of Patrick Claiborne and two of his aides rode out and stripped down, and they're all together and swam at a place called Ovaka Falls. And the boss goes, "Hey, you want to get naked swimming?" What are you supposed to say to that? So you do it.
Is that when he rode back? He couldn't get his socks back on because they got wet, so he had to ride back barefoot. It was like
one boot on, one boot. It was some silly thing. But William Hardee, and this is all these stories. William Hardee was many times hanging with Patrick Claiborne, who was very shy.
Yeah,
Claiborne was. Hardee was kind of a flirt who loved the lovely ladies of a place called Beechwood Plantation. And there was that one time when Hardee and Claiborne met a few young women along the way while riding, and Claiborne was embarrassed because he had some dirty uniform, looked like he'd been rolling around in the sewage tank all day. And he's gonna ride back to change. Now Hardee is going to return to camp, and he's looking for his wild Irish general. That's what he called him.
And Claiborne's in his tent bitching about how Hardee has to talk to the ladies.
And Hardee says, he says to him, "Is it not proper for a subordinate officer invited to ride with his commander to come properly dressed and not be frightened home by the sight of a couple of ladies?" It was kind of a joke, and that's kind of how it was. So it was lightened up, but there was definitely an animosity towards Bragg. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
On the Union side, the warming weather brought more pressure from Lincoln on Rosecrans that he desperately wanted to move against Bragg. He wanted Bragg out of Tennessee, primarily because he wanted those men away from Johnston and Pemberton in Mississippi.
Yeah. And so, as Grant's success at Vicksburg becomes more and more apparent, as you said, like they don't want more Confederate troops to be drawn to Vicksburg, because that was what happened at Stones River, right? Like that's why Bragg loses Stones River, because he's down a division, right? Because one of the divisions got drawn to Vicksburg. So like, and during this time too, like prior to the Tullahoma campaign, there's been some reconnaissance activity, some skirmishing between Union and Confederates, but it's not much. It's basically like everybody's to winter quarters, and they're sorting out their own dramas in each army is happening. And that's when Rosecrans comes up with this plan, which is going to become the Tullahoma campaign.
He's finally going to get rolling. He's finally
Yep.
get going, and he figures it's time to move. Okay, so Tullahoma campaign basically begins slowly and not aggressively. Now, what's amazing about Tullahoma is we'll talk about this is it's very devoid of battles. It just
Hmm.
is. It's
Yep.
going to start when he assigns a reserve corps under General Gordon Granger to leave Murfreesboro and march on a town of Trioun. Now, in a nutshell, we'll talk about this plan. His plan is diversion. It's smoke and mirrors. Okay, this move is nothing more by Granger to just basically big demonstration designed to confuse Bragg, which sounds like didn't take a lot. And he spent the last 6 months anxiously awaiting Rosecrans to come. He knew he was coming and was just waiting.
Yep.
Granger is going to move south, is going to move towards a town called Shelbyville, which is on Bragg's right, okay, with the hopes that the rebel general will basically fix his entire attention there, okay. He's actually on Bragg's left, not Bragg's right.
Yep.
So he's going to basically he sees them coming. In Granger, he's going to move his men like he's marching in the Rose Bowl parade. He's making as much noise as he can. He's got the brasses, he's got the going, he's got the girl with little twirly things, he's got everything, right?
He's got
Because
pinwheels.
he wants to make as much noise as he can. Hey, look at us. Here we come. Woo-hoo, we're
Yep.
coming. On the morning of June 23rd, Union cavalry under David Stanley is going to start moving southeast on the Lewisburg Pike from Trioun towards Shelbyville, with the plan to push back any rebel resistance at nearby Eagleville, Unionville, Middleton, and Rover, small little towns along that range. Okay, this is all happening to confuse Bragg. Now, Granger's infantry is moving southwest from Trioun to Salem to give the impression that a major attack is being planned at Shelbyville on Bragg's
Hmm.
left flank. Okay, predictably, this sets off all the alarms in Tullahoma,
Yep.
and Rosecrans' deception could not have worked better if you say literally plans it out, but that's exactly what they did. Rebel cavalry under Joseph Warchild Wheeler, okay, is going to see this and report to Bragg that a major attack is imminent in Shelbyville.
Yeah.
Wheeler's going to it was ordered basically to guard the eastern end of the line, Bragg's right, okay, not the western one where Granger was coming. So Wheeler decides that he's going to move his entire cavalry across that Confederate line from right to left towards Shelbyville. What this is going to do, it's going to leave that eastern end of the line guarded by a single cavalry brigade under John Wharton, okay, who is supposed to screen the whole rebel line east of a place called that Liberty Gap, that second gap. So what this means to the cavalry that Bragg wanted on his right, that early warning signal is now basically pretty much gone.
Hmm.
So the deception's working because guess where Rosecrans is going to go?
He's gonna go where there's not as many men.
Hey,
Hey.
I didn't know we got a West Pointer in the house.
Yeah.
But when Stanley's cavalry approaches Shelbyville, just outside of Eagleville, they're going to start to bump into some rebel cavalry who knew they were coming because they were, like I said before, they were not exactly being stealthy here. Okay, it's not you sneaking in on a Friday night back from drinking Labatt's over in to Goddard under the football stands at Goddard High here, Mary. They're making as much noise as they possibly can.
Okay.
We're talking the 7th, the 51st Alabama Cavalry, as well as the 2nd and 4th Georgia. Okay, they're going to be fought. They're going to fight those approaching Rebs for about 2 hours. That's what's going to happen,
Mhm.
and but those Rebs are going to be driven back by the 9th PA and the 2nd Michigan. So they're going to get pushed back pretty good. That next day, the Union cavalry is going to continue to push towards the town of Middleton,
Yep.
where they continue to drive off skirmishers, including sharpshooters perched in those the town buildings in the town. Now, after pushing them back, they're going to fall all the way back to a town called Christiana, and this is going to be really where the meeting point is going to be for the coming
Yep.
infantry. So they're all going to set up at a certain point to get there. And while this is going on, they're pushing back this rebel cavalry. But what they have is now they have Bragg's attention focused 100% on his left at this point because he's
Yep.
convinced that's where they're coming.
Yeah, but that's not the case.
No, I mean the next phase of Rosecrans' plan is really launched the next morning on the 24th. Okay,
Yeah.
this is when Alexander McCook's 20th Corps is going to begin to march from Murfreesboro, headed towards Liberty Gap. Okay, this is the next gap leading to Tullahoma. We talk about those gaps, right?
Right.
It's 6 o'clock in the morning. Okay, Colonel Luther Bradley, his brigade is going to march south on the Shelbyville Pike to secure a set of crossroads that lead to that town of Christiana. Now, this brigade was called the All Illinois Brigade. Guess why?
Because they're all from Illinois.
All from Illinois, okay? 22nd, 27th, 51st, and 42nd. Although they did have 5 companies from the Mounted Brigade in the 39th Indiana, so not really close, but that's what they were called. They're going to engage the Confederate picket line just outside of Murfreesboro at a place called the Knob. There you go with that, okay? And I mentioned this only because guess who was there fighting the Confederates? Our old friend Phil Sheridan.
Yep.
The king of the
he's
Valley,
there.
Mary.
Yep.
He was
there
there fighting with that. So you can kind of see how this is starting to go now, right? So by 8 o'clock in the morning, that next wave of the Union artillery infantry is going to start. They're all going to leave Murfreesboro. This is time it's going to be August Willich's 1st Brigade from the 20th Corps. This is Richard Johnson's division now. They'll be led again by mounted infantry from that 39th Indiana we mentioned under Thomas Harrison, right? Now, guess what they're armed with, Mary? They're armed with Spencer repeaters too, right?
Yep.
And they're going to overwhelm that 1st and 3rd Kentucky so fast. There were a lot of these Kentucky guys were in the fields cutting wheat when they got caught.
Yep.
They ran right through them, okay? But McCook got good intel from these guys, from these wheat cutters, we like to call them, okay, who told him there were only 2 rebel regiments that were in the gap. So he ordered Willich to move forward and get it. So while the attention's on that Confederate left, the Union attack is starting on the center in the right now.
Yeah, it is. And this is where this is Liberty Gap we're talking about, right?
Well, this is when Willich got there. He deployed the 15th and 49th Ohio across the road to begin this. This is leading into Hoover. Is what this is doing. Okay, and they're going to survey that terrain. Now, when he saw that the rebels were defending a steep, rocky hill in a strong position, and there was no way they could possibly attack them straight on, so he decided to extend his line by putting the 32nd Indiana on his left and the 39th Indiana, those Harrison guys, on his right. I mentioned before that those wheat cutting prisoners mentioned there was 2 regiments, okay? The 2 regiments that they talked about were good ones, with the 5th Arkansas and the combined 13th and 15th Arkansas under St. John Liddell's brigade under Patrick Claiborne's division, Hardee's Corps, okay? Now, the Union men did have greater numbers, and they did eventually tell the story. And it did push the Arkansanians. What do you say there? Arkansans. Okay, you don't say that word too often. Basically, back to take that Liberty Gap. We'll talk more about Liberty Gap later on. Okay. But Claiborne did trust that Liberty Gap to Liddell, thinking if they was going to be attacked, they could certainly hold it long enough to let Claiborne bring up reinforcements, which did not happen. And this is when the lightning fast Union attack came and drove Liddell out towards Liberty Gap. Now, Claiborne is sitting at his headquarters in near the town of Wartrace, and he found this is going on just around dark. This is all going on. The next morning, we're going to jump around here a little bit, but the next morning, Claiborne is going to try to retake it by reinforcing Liddell with 3 regiments from Sterling A.M. Wood's brigade. But they didn't attack the pass full on here, and they didn't even really advance his men. What Claiborne decides to do is he's going to use his sharpshooters here. Okay, now they were armed with Whitworths, and if you studied Claiborne, you know how much he loves sharpshooters. Okay?
Oh yeah, he loves them, especially after Shiloh, when he realizes he's like, shit, if I had sharpshooters, I might have been able to make more ground on that second day.
So he does, and he's going to start picking off the Feds from 1,700 yards, 1,700 feet away. He's going to start picking these guys off. Now, Claiborne's thinking he could hold the Feds in place until Leonidas Polk arrives, right? Now, this plan is going to fizzle when Claiborne gets a message from his boss, William Hardee, who told him to fall back as a large enemy force just blew right by Alexander Stewart's division, who was stationed just east of the next pass, which is called Hoover's Gap, okay? So just kind of moving geography right across. Now, again, remember too, the weather, it's pouring, okay? It sucks out, okay? Claiborne's pissed because he, again, is told he has to retreat. Now, if you study Claiborne, you know that his story is whenever he gets in a situation, he's going to move forward. He always has kind of told he has to stop. That's kind of, and this is going to happen again. It's a constant theme. One of Claiborne's men writes in his diary after this latest retreat at Liberty Gap. Oh God, must we leave our homes and our loved ones to the mercy of the ruthless foe again, too, without an effort to prevent it? Now, many of these Rebs were retreating in the rain. They're wearing no shoes. Many got lost in the mud. They had no
Hmm.
dry clothes. And this added to the resentment towards Bragg, which is a constant theme, who felt his men retreated too often. That same soldier who talked about the defending our homes, he's going to write, one thing is certain, if Bragg cannot whip Rosecrans, he can certainly outrun him. So
Yep.
it's kind of funny how that goes. And this is going to lead towards Hoover's Gap. Okay, now the move towards Hoover's Gap that Hardy described was George Thomas's
Yep.
14th Corps, led by his 4th Division under Joseph Reynolds.
Hmm.
And I know we're going to talk about this whole situation, but leading his way is his famous Mounted Hatchet Brigade under the
Yep.
aforementioned John Wilder.
Yep. Colonel John T. Wilder is leading these men. This is the major battle, the Tullahoma campaign, and it's actually, if any of you live in the area, it's just off Interstate 24. So this area is formed by a range of hills that run westward from the Cumberland Mountains, and the pike ran for 2 miles through the hills. The valley is barely wide enough to admit the passage of 2 wagons side by side, so it's really narrow. It's hard to get through. And as Darren said, Colonel Wilder is here with his brigade of mountain infantry, and they're called the Hatchet Brigade at this time. They're not yet called the Lightning Brigade.
You know why they were called that?
Because they carried hatchets with them.
They called hatchet because
Yep.
when they had to get their own weapons, they've got hatchets.
Yep.
Which is pretty cool.
Yeah, exactly. They didn't use sabers. They had hatchets, which is pretty badass. Hatchets, pretty badass.
I'm gonna start walking around the bars with a hatchet.
Oh my God. Yeah. So the thing with this, and you mentioned this, Darren, like the weather, it's raining. So it's drizzling when they leave for Hoover's Gap, and it will rain all day. So Colonel James Conley, who has excellent firsthand account of this, which just Google Colonel James Conley, Hoover's Gap. It's a really great account. He said, on the morning of June 24th at 3 a.m., we left camp 5 miles north of Murfreesboro and started to the front in advance of everything. So they are going out ahead of the army. And he said there was silence in the column as we moved along through the mud, and every ear was strained to catch the sound of the first gun of our advance guard that would tell us of the presence of the enemy. So they're constantly listening for something. They think that Bragg must be there. Wilder knew that Bate was defending the top of the gap. However, they find the summit unoccupied. And Conley says, as we swept through the valley with 1,500 horsemen on gallop, we noticed the lines of entrenchments crowning the hills. They were deserted. The enemy was surprised and flying before us. So like Bragg's men have been like, oh shit, we need to leave. Like we have to get out of here. So Wilder, all of a sudden, he's under orders to retreat. But despite this, he decides to try and hold the gap. And Wilder entrenches in the hills south of the gap. He's determined to hold the position that is very advanced of where the infantry are that can support him. So if he gets in a mess, the infantry are too far back that they can't come up and rescue him. So noon on June 24th, the first gun is fired. And Conley says, we pushed ahead rapidly, for we were nearing the formidable Hoover's Gap, which was supposed to cost a great many lives to pass through. And our brigade commander determined to surprise the enemy, if possible, by rapid march and make a bold dash through the gap and hold it with our brigade along with the rest of the army until the rest of the army could get up. So Conley even saying, we have to hold this place. And again, the Confederate cavalry have been so surprised that they vacate the dance floor so quickly. And Conley describes them as going through the woods and over the hills in every direction, every fellow for himself. That's exactly how it was. It was mass chaos when they leave. And there is just one lone Confederate cavalry to hold this gap. And these are the guys that are quickly pushed out of it. But what stops Wilder's men initially is a shell explodes near them. And this tells them that they've finally reached where the artillery and the infantry are. So they finally reached to where these men have run back to. And this is the point that Wilder is like, okay, I'm not going to retreat. I'm just going to stay here and hold this. They are 12 miles in advance of the army. And they had taken a point which it was expected would require a large part of the army to take. This is what Conley says. And Conley goes on to say, but the serious question with us now was, could we alone hold it in the presence of a superior force? Well, Wilder learns that there's just being confronted with 4 brigades of infantry and 4 batteries. And he's kind of like, all right, I'm just going to do this. So Wilder will have his men dismount. They will form a battle line at the entrance to Hoover's Gap, and Lily's gunners are going to come in and just open on the Confederates. And Wilder dispatches a courier to the rear in order to hurry up the enforcements, like, you guys need to get up with us. And the horses, they draw them back out of the way of the bursting shells. Because just remember, these are not, a lot of these horses have just been procured, from the Southerners. They've taken them from farms and stuff. Some of them have been shipped from the North. But if they lose their horses, that's it. Like, they can't lose any of these horses. The Confederates are describing opening a terrific fire of shot and shell from 5 different points, and their masses of infantry with flags flying moved out of the woods and on our right in splendid style. So Conley's describing them as suddenly attacking them. And meanwhile, as all this is going on, it's raining, and the Wilder and his men are outnumbered, 3 to 4, 3 or 4 times are what's attacking them. And the Confederates come at them, and Wilder's men fire their Spencers. And the advancing regiment reeled, and its colors fell to the ground. But in an instant, their colors are back up again, and on they come, thinking to reach the battery before our guns can be reloaded. But they reckoned with their host. They didn't know we had Spencers, and their charging yell was answered by a terrible volley, and another without cessation, until the poor regiment was literally cut to pieces, and but few men of that 20th Tennessee that attempted the charge will never charge again. And that's what Colonel James Conley, he just describes them. They cut down these men of the 20th Tennessee that are charging them.
Oh, it's the speed. I mean, that's the thing about
yeah,
them.
it's like you can, I think they said like you could fire on a Sunday and fire or something like that. Like you just keep going. And the thing is, these men covet their Spencers. Because they've been paid back for them. But beginning, every rifle, every man was going to pay for. You paid for your own rifle, so you're going to covet it. You also know the Confederates do not have these access to these Spencers yet. This is a Union weapon that they have. And Connolly talks about, one corporal in the 17th Indiana was shot through the chest. And these men, because they coveted them so much, they would sooner break their weapons if they were wounded than risk the Confederates coming in to take them. So this one guy who was shot through the chest, he didn't have the strength to break it. So he took out his knife. He unscrewed a part of the lock plate that would just basically make the gun useless, threw it away, and then he fell back and died. But before he died, he rendered the Spencer completely useless because he did not, and that's one of these human stories that is coming out of this, this battle of Hoover's Gap, that it's just these men are fighting hard. And, what is helping them is now we're seeing how the technology of warfare, as horrific as this is, the technology of warfare is why Wilder, despite the fact he's outnumbered, however many men, he's able to do this and hold this very, very well.
They drove. I mean, you had those 5 companies led by Sam Kirkpatrick, and that's 72nd Indiana, right? And they ran right through that first picket line. Yeah. Hazardous too, went right through it. Okay, and just imagine that. The last thing they probably expected was to see these guys coming so quick, and they moved so fast. Those rebel defenders didn't have time to set up even a defensive line.
No,
they ran away so fast that Howard would blush. That's how fast they moved. Okay, hey. They left behind 7 wagons. They left behind regimental flags, a bunch of empty DQ Blizzard cups, all kinds of trash. They just went left and ran. Right. The thing is, it happened so fast. The rebel commanders didn't even know that it even happened until after the fact. Right. So figure 1 o'clock back at his headquarters. Our old friend Bushrod Johnson, Mary, okay? Ew. He's sitting there, and he first hears of this assault when a pair of local riffraff boys, some urchins, they come running into his camp and tell him guess what we just saw, right? What happens? Now that you have men from the 1st and 3rd Kentucky, they're going to corroborate this story that they just got overran. Bushrod immediately is going to text General Alexander Stewart on his phone. He's going to say, he's going to forward the message to William Bate, saying, "Hey, you have a brigade nearby. You might want to send them over to Hoover's Gap because friggin' bunch of guys just ran through here." Bate is going to quickly set up those those guys, this is what's going on behind the scenes on the Confederate side.
Mhm.
That 20th Tennessee you mentioned, the 37th Georgia, the Eufaula Light Artillery. They're at the village of Beech Grove where the plantation was, where old William Hardee was getting his swerve on Mary. Okay.
Ooh.
And they're near Hoover's Gap, and as well as some sharpshooters from Georgia under Theodore Caswell. Now, Bay figures is the most logical place here is to stop this Union advance, like you mentioned. But they had to stop Wilder first, and this is the thing about him though is they had some initial luck against him. This 20th Tennessee and this
Yep.
37th Georgia. Okay, now Wilder was a fella who liked to fight, Mary, as you
Oh,
know.
yeah.
And when ordered to fall back, he pulled out his old "F this" card. He
Yep.
wasn't having it,
Nope.
right?
He's like, "Nope, we're doing this."
He's gonna place two companies of the 98th Illinois along a road, along with the 72nd Indiana near a graveyard. Okay, supported by a pair of howitzers and six 10-pound Rodman guns. Okay, so he's coming to fight on the center of this hill, supported by the 123rd Illinois and the 17th Indiana. Okay, now
Mhm.
Wilder's men had no support. They outraced their coverage. Don't forget, they were so fast. They were a full 6 miles ahead of the infantry.
Yeah, but these guys are like badass, and Lily's gunners are they're starting to earn themselves a reputation, in the Army of the Cumberland as being like these badasses that can just like they annihilate the Confederates.
Mhm.
Lily's guys are really amazing.
But you're Wilder now, and you've got your guys, and you've got the Spencers, but they're not long range weapons. You've got some guns, but you've got no support, and he's being told to fall. He's going to be told to fall back now
Yep.
in front of Williams Bate, the Confederate side. He has his full brigade, and he has two batteries of artillery, which is going to begin firing on Wilder's guns. They're quickly going to take out two gunners. They're going to take out a bunch of mules. Um, Bate is going to then send in that 20th Tennessee and those Caswell sharpshooters in to try to flank the 17th Indiana. Now, what is Wilder going to do? He's going to send in the 98th Illinois,
Yep.
which were his reserves. Now he's in his reserves. Now he's going into the deep in the pocket now,
Yep.
and they attack the Rebs who are just about on the verge of turning his position. And what this is going to result is a brutal firefight within 100 yards of each other, firing right into their friggin' faces. Okay. The Rebs fall to the ground. They literally crawl back
Hmm.
to the woods. Okay. A messenger now arrives. Okay. He tells Wilder, you need to fall back. You need to friggin' fall back. And Wilder says, you know what? Nope.
Nope.
Ain't doing
He
it.
keeps going. Like Conley says, he keeps going. And Conley's account of this is one of like it's an amazing account. I encourage anybody to go read it.
But you know what's
It
cool about Wilder with this messenger? He says, I'm not going back. You
no.
need to go back and you need to tell them I said I'm not doing it.
Yeah.
Balls. Okay. It
Oh,
just
big
is.
time.
Okay.
Yeah, this is
Um,
and this is set like, this is setting up for what he is going to do at Chickamauga in September. That he is, you know, this is the battle that is kind of his he's been thrown to the fire. I mean, his men have done things before, but this is his like you have to look back to what Halleck said that mounted infantry are basically useless, and Wilder has just done this is his hold my beer moment right here is Hoover's Gap
oh,
with
it
what
certainly is.
Halleck said about them, hold my beer.
At some point, Bate's going to realize I got mounted
Yeah.
infantry here. I got to keep going. So Bate is going to try again. This time he's going to go straight at those six gun batteries he was going to go at using his 20th Tennessee and 37th Georgia again. These guys have been taking a beating at this point. I mean, this is
Yeah.
just bad. And they're going to charge in with Fields, and they're going to run right into the 123rd Illinois, who've been hit. They were hiding in a ravine. So this gets worse and worse for them. And when the Southerners approached, they rose up this 123rd and just boom, 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 just laid them out. Wilder said of this specific part of the battle, he says, no human being could successfully face the avalanche of this destruction. That was a quote he said. Now, this is going to force the Rebs to basically fall back, and they're done. Bates guys took that beating. They lost an estimated 25% of the brigade. They went down trying to retake Hoover's Gap. They'll mercifully be replaced by Bushrod Johnson's Tennessees, who are going to get in the field right around
Yep.
6 p.m. or so. And Wilder finally is going to get a little bit of a break here. So for his efforts, he's going to get relieved when George Crook's brigade arrives. They're going to show up.
Mhm.
And despite giving the finger to the orders and openly defying his orders, he's going to get high fives from everybody in that army command. And I know Thomas is going to say some pretty cool things about him.
He does, and it's funny. So Wilder sees Rosecrans and Thomas riding up, and I don't know, like Thomas is kind of like the Eeyore. He's Eeyore of the army at this point. I don't know if that makes Rosecrans like Piglet right now. I just picture Piglet and Eeyore coming up. Why I thought of that anyway. So Wilder thinks he's gonna catch shit for disobeying orders. He tells Rosecrans he's like, yeah, I know what I did, but it was for good reason. And Rosecrans says, thank God for your decision. It would have cost 2,000 lives to have taken this position if you had given it up. And he turns to Reynolds and he says, Wilder has done right. Promote him. So Wilder is gonna get promoted. And then Thomas says to Wilder, you have saved 1,000 men by your gallant conduct today. I didn't expect to get this gap for 3 days. So Wilder has held his own here. And the other thing that is going to happen because of what happens at Hoover's Gap is his men are going to get the name of the Lightning Brigade.
They were called the Hatchet Brigade. It was kind of
Yep.
derogatory because they were carrying the hatchets we talked about. And because of how fast they moved,
Yeah.
there's going to be an official pronouncement. This isn't just a nickname. They'd be officially known from this point on as the Lightning Brigade.
Yep.
So at this point of the battle, the Union is going to control the gaps. Okay. And we're going to talk on our next action-packed episode of how Bragg is going to react to this. Okay.
Mhm.
It's not going to surprise you, Mary, that at this point of the battle, Bragg has no idea what's going on. He
No,
doesn't
he
even know this.
doesn't.
He doesn't know this stuff is going on his right. He thinks the battle is still coming on his left, and he's waiting for it. And he's going to find out the hard way. So I think we should drop this episode here and
Yep.
set up the rest of it. Okay. So when we go back to the boys, they're going to be set up the Union, more than men in blue. We're going to be sitting on the gaps waiting for the next order from Rosecrans, who so far has sprung this perfect campaign to get to Tullahoma. And so far, so good. So we'll see how it turns out next time. So I know when I ask you this question, what's coming up next, I kind of know the answer to this one.
So next Wednesday, July the 13th, we are having our roundtable at 6:00 Eastern time via Zoom. Info at civilwarbreakfastclub.com. If you've never attended, I'm going to be sending out, or I should say, we're going to be sending out invites this weekend for that. So
You are coming.
Hope you can join us for that. Our Facebook Live, if you're listening to this on Saturday morning, is going to be at 10:00. Obviously on Facebook. So hope you can join us. Next week's episode, obviously Tullahoma Part 2. And then after that, we will let you know. We are still in the planning stages. We are planning possibly to take a few weeks off in August just because we have a lot going on. And just it doesn't seem like we're that close, but I mean, episode 88, episode 100 is on the horizon for us. So we are trying to plan something special for episode 100. And as well, our book club, we hopefully will be announcing a date for that soon to talk George Meade at Gettysburg. Kent Masterson Brown, amazing book.
So some strange things afoot at the Circle K, Mary, as we go off into our episode. So 88 is in the books, off to 89. Yeah. 89, it will be the second half of the Tullahoma campaign, where we'll see if Rosecrans and his Army of the Cumberland can take the Army of Tennessee, led by the great Braxton Bragg. Can he do it? Can he do it? We'll find out soon. All right. So off we go. Any final words from you, Fincheru?
Well, thank you for being an amazing co-host, as you always are, and bringing it every single time. And thanks to our listeners for your support these last 88 episodes. It has been amazing.
And same to you and the horse you rode in on. There we go.
What did I do to you?
Nothing.
What, did I give you a bad blizzard at the DQ?
It's all good. It's all the blizzard. It spilled out and didn't stick in there, but it's okay. All right.
Well, maybe if you weren't such a bastard customer.
Okay. Well, okay. On that note, okay. I was going to wave my Canadian flag, but I guess I'm not going to now.
You're an honorary Canadian now. You've had Tim Hortons.
Well, Canada Day is over, so time to move on. Okay. All right, everybody. Thanks for listening. We appreciate it. So off to part 2 of Tullahoma. We'll record that one next week, and off we go. Hope to see you at the round table. Hope to see you at our live. And maybe, Mary, hope to see you with a smile on your face once in a while coming up soon. So we'll God, we'll find out. All right, guys, we appreciate it. We'll talk to you soon. Have a great rest of the week. Hope you have a good weekend. Hope it's cool where you are, and stay safe.
See you guys later.
Peace the hell out.
Okay, bye.
Do 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 do.